What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. And this is the second half of a doozy, a little Q&A episode I did with Luke Norsworthy from the Newsworthy with Norsworthy podcast. So if this is not necessarily the second half of the conversation for you, then remember, you can check out the first half at Newsworthy with Norsworthy, the podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I'm glad you're here. But don't worry, you don't really have to have heard the first half to enjoy this, because we are responding to a whole bunch of questions sent in by listeners. Over on Luke's podcast, we talked about some Calvinism, some Trump, theological edginess in congregations, changes over the next few years and such in the church. But in this podcast, this one, we talk about like our favorite moment in podcast past that blew our mind, former guests on our podcast that we want to be on the others, our favorite Bible story to tell with our kids, what Christians are going to fight about after they finish fighting about sexuality and things like that, how being a minister impacted our theology. I try to explain process theology to him as a Bible-believing Christian, and he tries to grade me. And then we take strong opinions that we know we're in the minority. It's a lot of fun. And we did all this to let you know that the high-quality video version of the Devil Palooza is out. That's right, the live podcast in which Luke and I welcomed NT Wright, Gregory Boyd, and Richard Beck there. When we had a crossover podcast, when that happened in Malibu Live, that is now available for your video digesting in HD. And if you head over to homebrewedchristianity.com or go to Luke's website, there'll be links to it for both of you. And TJ, Tony Jones, was co-hosting with me for the Homebrewed side. So if you haven't heard the episode, then now you can watch it. And if you have heard it, you can watch the video anyway. And you should share it, because you'll see what a live Homebrewed podcast is like. So before we jump in, I just wanted to tell you, I wrote an ebook about like deciding if you should go to seminary, divinity school, and such. So if you're considering theological education, there are 10 questions that people emailed me, texted me, and asked me all the time. I took them, I answered them, and I got a whole bunch of people that work in different admissions departments of different schools, seminaries, div schools, and such, to answer them as well, to bring you some crystallized, condensed wisdom. So if you'd like that ebook, you can go to the Homebrewed website and click on the side and get it. Or, since you're probably driving, if you're in the U.S., you can text seminary to 44222. That's right, text the word seminary, SEMINARY, to 44222. And you can get that ebook delivered up for free right into your email box. So, all right, here it comes. Homebrewed Christianity Deacons. It's time. It's time for the goodness of, Luke and I trying to answer your questions. All right? Peace out.
Welcome, theology nerds. We're gonna homebrew this up. This is your host, Luke Norsworthy.
Oh, that was almost exciting.
Was it? Were you not excited? I feel like I kind of like have to pump them up because they aren't being told to get ready for some awesome. I was trying to just orally prepare them for awesome with just the sound in their ear, but I don't think it did enough.
Well, this is part 2 of the crossover episode of Luke Norsworthy, who is Newsworthy and Homebrewed. So if you want to hear the first half of the conversation, you have to go to Luke Norsworthy's podcast.
Yep. And if you want more Bone Thugs and Harmony references, go to the Newsworthy podcast, because that's where they live. Because I'm from Ohio at one point in my life. Cleveland is the city where we come from, so run. Referencing Bone Thugs and Harmony twice already in the podcast. This, like you said, it's the second part. We've got more questions to go.
I know, but people may be saying, I haven't listened yet. if you go over there, you'll hear Luke and I answer, like, what are 3 things Tripp likes about Calvinism?
Yes.
How can you be a Christian and vote for Trump? How many theological topics do you avoid to keep your job? If you could have any 2 guests on a future Crossover Live podcast episode, who would it be?
That was a really good
Label
answer.
each other, no Rob Bell dodging. And in the next 10 years, what will be the biggest change in the American church? We covered all that already.
That's a lot. And we've got plenty more to go. And Tripp, your stuff about the return of the sermon, that's life-changing.
You know what else is life-changing? Devilpalooza.
It was so good. And some people I hear weren't able to be there. They've heard it, but they want to watch it. And so, Tripp, what do you think they should do if they want to watch it?
I think they should just go to the website, because you can get on your clicky clicks and get access to the Devilpalooza right now with NT Wright and Gregory Boyd and Richard Beck. And we had ourselves a theological dandy of a time.
Yeah, we did.
And Matt, we got to give a shout out to Matt
Maxwell. Dropping some serious video skills on the old internet. It's really good. It's well shot. The video is very well done. The setting was awesome. Tripp hooked us up with a great place in Malibu, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. You're going to want to watch this video. It's great.
And it's HD.
It's going to be huge.
So you can pause it at any point in the video and make it go full screen, and then you could take a picture. Like a selfie with Luke and his beautiful smile, or NT Wright, and the
beautiful fake front teeth. They can be on your camera if you take a picture of yourself next to me and my fake front teeth.
You have fake front teeth?
I did. I broke them when I was in 5th grade on the bus stop. Actually, because I was born in West Philadelphia, until I got in one little fight. My mom got scared because I broke my front teeth, and that's how I ended up down in Texas. But yeah, they're fake. Once I was on a date. The girl, I'm not going to say her name, Allie, and I was talking to her, just dropping some serious game, the Bible-inspired game, because I was a preacher in waiting. All the good lines like, "Girl, is your last name Amen? Because you've ended all my prayers." That kind of stuff right there. Like all
that's
the
quality. Yeah,
that's real good stuff. And I like, hey, do you know why Solomon had 500 or however many wives he had? Because, girl, he never met you. Like, I was doing all that. And then I felt this cool breeze in my mouth as a 16-year-old. I was like, that's weird. And then I put my fingers in my mouth where my front teeth used to be, and they're not there anymore because I had taken a bite and my fake front teeth got stuck in the peanut butter and jelly sandwich I was eating. And then I swallowed that bite, which not only include peanut butter, jelly, bread, but also my 2 front teeth. It's just one. It was just one front tooth. And
was this near Christmas?
No, but the original time it happened was right around Christmas. And so, yeah, they sang that song. Actually, one time during, this was right around that time, my sophomore year in high school, I went to school the following week with 3 different sets of front teeth because they're like trying them out and getting different ones. And there was a girl in my art class named Missy Cunningham. Not that I'm still bitter and I remember you, Missy Cunningham. But she said, Luke, your front teeth look like chiclets. Like someone got the gum and just shoved it in your mouth. Well, let me tell you the rest of the story, Tripp.
Good, because I'm captivated.
This is good. So after school that day, Missy is playing softball, where she's a third baseman on the softball team. The hot corners, what they call it. And she was taking grounders at third, and a ball was hit to her and took a funny bounce. Some called it a bad hop. I was not one of them. And it hit her right in her face, and it broke her tooth. Tripp, that's the moment that I started believing in prayer. Come on now.
Well.
Yes.
You use that like every year during revival? Use that?
I should. That's good. Isn't it a good story?
Uh-huh. When I was in 5th grade, there was a girl that really liked me and was being very aggressive. And I was scared because I just wanted to watch professional wrestling and ones.
Yes.
And so she decided, she was new. She'd just come to school. And I guess she was just like, "What's up, Tripp?" And I was, uncomfortable. And then all of her friends like come up and ask me if I liked her. I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. Then she sits down next to me in art class. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm still like phobic of females. And she coughs and was holding a pencil and goes, "Achoo," and the pencil goes through her nose.
Oh, no.
And there was squirtage.
Oh.
And I was splattered. And it was Yeah, it was.
Hey, that's a good lesson, guys. Do not take art class. That's why schools are getting rid of art and PE, because they lead to pencils in the nose or breaking your front teeth.
Yeah, the only purpose of public education is to teach you how to use technology, math, and science. So you can serve our oppressive capitalistic system as a cog and never think about change.
USA.
So,
man, I'm not going to lie. This intro is a little bit better than the one we did for my podcast.
It's because you were talking more.
That's why. Hey, you can't hate on someone who goes on rants, because I feel like that's one of your strong suits.
Oh, look.
Your rant game is pretty good. Also, what we found out in the last podcast is that we're both 34 years old.
We did.
You just had a birthday, so happy birthday.
You're my elder, though.
I am. I'm actually older than you.
Yep.
So since I'm the senior one, I feel like I should just jump in and get right into the questions. Yeah. Now, these are questions that are follow-up questions from the Devilpalooza podcast. We've got questions that have come in from listeners. So let's do it. Let's jump right in. So the first question, what moment or two in past podcast conversations blew your mind?
Ooh. Well, a really nerdy one would be, I think it's like episode 500 or so. One of the times John Cobb was on, and he said that he doesn't think that the Trinity is a necessary Christian doctrine, but the incarnation is, and that too many people's obsession with the Trinity has made them ignore the missional side of the incarnation, and the call for embodying the mission of God in Jesus, and he's arguing we should join God in working for the salvation of the world, and if we're not doing that, then and discussing how three persons relate and such, then it's just a distracting doctrine, and it's not even needed anymore if you fix your philosophy. Then later in the same interview, I think, or it could have been another John Cobb one. No, it was a different one. It was a Christmas episode, like in 2009 or 2010. We did an Advent series, and we were talking about Advent. And
is that Christmas, right?
That's what the historic church, not the true church, like you church peoples, but
Church of Christ. Come on, bro. Come on, bro.
During Advent, leading up to Christmas, we were talking about it, and he said that Jesus, the coming of God, which is what you're anticipating in Advent, is a threat to the most global, persuasive, and powerful religion, economism. It has occupied even the birth of the forsaken, forgotten, crucified Savior. And I was like, there's a reason your initials are JC.
Yeah, JC dropping some truth bombs. I know it's a really good point when I think, hey, this can go back and help me with my day job as a preacher. Like you said something descriptive, prescriptive. I wrote that down and go, I can use that in a sermon. Those two things that our buddy Cobby said, those are great. Those are really, really good. The moment I think that stands out to me, one of the most poignant moments was a year before the Devilpalooza. I was in Southern California with my friend Richard Beck, and we took a little trip down to Laguna Beach, where a friend, Mr. Rob Bell, used to live. And we had Richard Beck, Rob, and myself doing a podcast. And Rob went on this rant about, he started off with this hypothetical question where he says, people always say, Rob, if you're going to start a church, what would you do today? And he says, you know what I would do? I would just get some bread, break it open, and pour some wine. And he goes, I think the Eucharist is the thing that can save the evangelical church. And I think that's the centerpiece of it. He says, the rest of it's this house of cards. It's eventually going to collapse. But what can save the church is the bread and the wine. And I go, that's it. It was a moment, like, I don't know, when you were hearing that, you're going, wow, this is really special. But when he was saying that, I was going, this is the coolest thing. This is why I started the podcast, to be in conversations just like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember him saying stuff like that. It's interesting to hear it when you know where he's been. Like I think that's part of the if some like teenager in the youth group at your church showed up at church council meeting and was just like,
if I say
what we need is just some bread and wine, and you're like, but you're 15.
He's just trying to get some wine because he doesn't want to wait 6 more years. So he says, bring it to church. But Rob's saying it. Yeah, that's good.
Do you remember, can you identify the Christian rapper that said, I'm not that hip on getting drunk on liquor, because it's the Holy Ghost that gets me drunk much quicker?
No clue.
No.
I don't know Christian rap that well.
Well, it came out about the same time as Shaq's album, which is heavenly rap. So the next question is, what former guest of yours should be on the other one's show and why? Well, I already know the correct answer is John Cobb, because I just told you 2 things he said.
Yeah, he sounds great. Yeah, he's never been on mine, so that sounds like a good one. You had Richard Beck at the Devil Palooza, but I feel like he needs his own independent episode on your show.
Well, that's cheating, because he's already been on the podcast, and we're telling people to go watch the video of him.
The Devil Palooza, which
is your chance to try to witness to me. See, I was anticipating you were going to say a couple things. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say
Jesus. Jesus would be a good person to have on your show. What did you think I was going to say?
Oh, I thought you were going to say AJ.
AJ, because you haven't had AJ on. We just talked about AJ Levine in the first half of this. I said it's a good one.
And I agree with you. It just sounded way too Calvinist. I remember you and Storm and Norman was all worried about AJ and his Calvinism, and
AJ, no, you're talking about AJ Swoboda,
yeah,
or AJ Levine. Okay, yeah. Sorry, wrong AJ. You think Swoboda come on your podcast?
No, I thought that's what you were going to say, because we had talked about it, and I was taking it aside, and.
That would be good. Yeah. No, AJ Swoboda, he's a Calvinist that brings up the sarcasm in me. So he's a good guest, I think, in terms of a good point guard gets a shooting guard to the right spots where they can shoot, right? And he's a good guest. He gets you to spots where you can have some funny conversations.
But you know what MVP point guards do? Score 4 points in the last 6 minutes of an NBA finals.
Yeah, when he and Clay go for 36 on 11 for 40 shooting, I don't think they're going to win. Yeah. Okay.
Mouthpiece. I bet he'd shoot half his mouthpiece up, and he had a new one. It could have, because he threw the other one like a winner at people in the crowd in Game 6 when he got kicked out. So maybe. He just had a new mouthpiece, and it was just not fitting good.
And that makes a difference. It really does.
Messes up your wide open threes that you miss.
See, the difference in the sport of basketball and the sport of wrestling, I was a wrestler in high school, and I had fake front teeth, which we've already discussed ad nauseum. So I'd wear a mouthpiece when I wrestled because it wasn't cool back then to wear mouthpieces, but I really just had to so my teeth wouldn't fall out. And I never... Not pro wrestling, different sport. In the sport of, you don't ever just take it out and kind of chew on it for a couple seconds, because whatever, different sport.
When I worked construction, one of the guys I worked construction with was named Bones. That wasn't his real name, but the African American and white members of the construction crew called him Bones, and all the Hispanic and South American members called him Chicken. And it was because I didn't know till my first Friday when I finally got invited, because I'm 20 years old right now.
I have no clue where the story's going.
I get invited to go to the post Friday construction worker meal, which is at a wing establishment in the South. And Chicken, or Bones, depending on who you are, pulls his teeth out, sets them on the table, grabs 3 chicken wings, and goes, and he gums and pulls them out, and they're just dry bones. So that's how he got his name, Chicken.
That's a great story. That's really, wow.
Everything else he talked to me is not even safe for podcasting.
Yeah, even your podcast. not mine. Your podcast.
Standards.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So one of the things that he probably didn't talk to you about was his favorite Bible story. But one of our listeners wants to know what our favorite Bible stories to tell our kids are. Trip?
Ooh, well, I personally am big into telling Elgin, the 8-year-old boy, as many entertaining stories without large amounts of myth of redemptive violence in it from the Hebrew scriptures, but he really likes it. So his favorite is the story of Deborah and the judge, Deborah, who gets called in and she leaves the army and just drops it like it's hot.
It seems like that one has a good bit of violence in it.
It does.
So you didn't really do that good on veering away from that whole violence thing.
I know, but that's his favorite. And because the pictures of it were really cool when he was 3 in the Spark Bible. The Spark Bible is my favorite children's Bible. Like I have
Does Advocare make that one?
It's Spark House is connected to Fortress.
Sorry, that was just a whatever.
The Spark House is my favorite kids' Bible, and the main reason for parenting purposes is it has this little bitty green worm in all the scenes, real small, but its face is real emotive, and it's there so that you as a parent realize what the story feels like if you're actually young reading it. Because if you've heard the story and you're like, yeah, that's right, God drowns everybody but one family. Like things where you're like, the sins, you're not scared or freaking out, or this isn't a big exciting thing because we got raised every year. It helps you think about what how your kid's hearing a story if they don't know it. And then it has like at the end of each one, some type of question that involves like you as a family playing out or acting or playing or talking about the text. So I love the Spark Bible. Deborah is his favorite. My favorite that's not in there is when the bad guys kill the bad guys. This is Tripp's version of it. And it's when, now the version I've told is a long story. We don't have to go hear it because it's high quality radio theater that I'd have to produce it if Homebrew ever makes children's audio Bibles. But it was my favorite when I was little. I told it to Elgin. Now he wants to hear it all the time. And it's when Israel's like, there's no chance we can win this fight. Look at their army. It's all huge and junk. And Joshua's like, what are we going to do? And God's like, I got a plan. Wait till it's night and then have the choir sneak in to the bad guys' camp. And when they start singing in the middle of the night, the bad guys freak out and start bopping the person next to them with their sticks. And you have, through high quality community organizing with choir leaders instead of swords, ability to get past your enemies to the promised land without killing them. They just knocked each other on the heads and passed out.
Bopping. I like that. I didn't see that in the original Hebrew, but I think that that's good. I like it.
I have a very liberal translation.
Sometimes you got to do that. I understand. My favorite Bible story to tell your kid, like you were saying earlier, like the flood, like with all the 2 animals going in, like that's a great kid story, or at least it's told that way. I think Frederick Buechner has a great line about like, it is the darkest story in all the Bible, but we make it a kid's story. So I'm going to steer away from like the whole earth except one family dying. I'm going to steer away from the killing stories. Honestly, the one that my kids like the most is probably because the catchphrase by Jesus at the end has become a phrase that's often repeated in our home. But the Jesus calming the storm, where he says, peace be still. My kids really like the peace be still. And so we hit that story pretty strong. And they go, peace be still. And they do hand motions. So that's it.
That's
okay.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. I mean, Jesus, I'm a big fan of Jesus. Okay. Next question. By the way, man, we've been going pretty strong at this for a while because we're doing 2 back-to-back.
Yeah.
We need to acknowledge this is stamina that we've got here.
What it is love for the listeners.
Lots of love
for the listeners.
And, love for the listener and respect for the craft. We love the craft of giving the people what they want. Okay, so the next question. After the sexuality battles are over, what stupid topic will Christians embarrass themselves arguing over?
This is,
So this kind of dovetails, in my opinion, to in 10 years, what will be the biggest change in the American church? Because in the first half of this, you referenced care of the earth being the big issue that church is going to care about. Is that where you're going to go with this? Is that the next subject? Or is there another one after that you can prognosticate?
Well, I'm kind of optimistic that after when I think of us embarrassing ourselves fighting over something, then that's different than necessarily like creation care type stuff. I think that is not going to be super controversial in the next 10 years or so. The controversial part of creation care will be whether or not religious institutions and groups do something that threatens kind of American economic dominance in the globe. The challenge for the American church that will be whether or not, as we hit things like climate crisis, peak oil, desertification with mass movement of people and peaking population, things like this, will the American church decide that its identification with the body of Christ is more important than its citizenship to the American empire? And that what would be so embarrassing is that you'll have ministers saying stuff that sounds as stupid as 2 Corinthians, and that you hear now when like Trump's trying to like rally troops. But even Southern Baptists know he's an idiot, like about stuff like that, and you shouldn't say it. But the question to be when the threats of global transformation touch our pocketbook, require us to change our consumption patterns and economic privilege and political power as a country, will we pick our flag or Christ? And it'd be embarrassing, I think, what some people do to justify not practicing any kenosis of power.
Yeah, the self-emptying stuff is, I think that's, I feel like in some ways that's like the underlying issue. If we go back to civil rights, I mean, the issue was, are we willing to give up what we have, our comfortability? Because to go in line with the broken, racially biased system required Christianity to give up what they had so that they could fight against it. I think the giving up the power thing, I think you're onto something. I feel like that's the subtext for every issue, and you can name it for different things. But when a church makes a change like that, they have to give up. And I remember hearing this quote from some Canadian minister, pastor, priest person after the church was being sued by someone because they had taken the land from natives or something, and they had to give their property, which is worth substantial amount of money. And he said, as long as we can have the chalice and the table, we're still church. And he's like, yeah, we are willing to give this up. I feel like he's onto something there. So I think maybe consumption, like the American consumption of resources. I think it'll somehow be tied to the American political system and elevating that over the cross. I think that's going to be the subject. I don't really have a keen eye on what exactly that's going to be.
And I would say, like, one of the ways of addressing this in advance for leaders in faith communities isn't degrading our nation in this kind of like attack it, and if you love it then you're bad, or that type of thing. That really creates animosity, even if you're trying to do something good, by putting down an institution that for many of your members may be one of the most important identifying marks for them. It would be better for us. And this, if you're thinking spiral dynamics, this is blue meme communication. Instead of attacking your political identity and institution as a nationalist, you affirm our global identity as the body of Christ. Yeah. So it ends up addressing the same issue. But when the church communicates issues like global, world-centric type thinking at the level of a more postmodern, enlightened type of thinking, you end up dismissing and getting rid of allies who are sitting there. If you say things like, every week when we say the Lord's Prayer and we pray, give us today our daily bread, we are praying it with 20,000 people who will die of starvation and malnutrition in areas this year that used to grow their own land. Why? Here's why. Because of how the climate's affecting desertification, blah, 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 blah. And use it. Like when we say, let us have our bread, we're praying with them. And that's our identity in our baptism. That's a positive way of stating the same thing, where it can be heard. And if we create the identity of us as a church, that where our identity as a nation's divorced from our identity as a follower of Christ, in times like this, as the issues become bigger, it will be those concerns will resonate lower down the kind of your level of social contact.
Yeah, definitely. I love the way that you said it, where you emphasize the universality of the church. And I hear sometimes people respond and say, well, America's great. I love America. And I don't feel like you have to degrade and say America's terrible. I mean, America, like every country, is imperfect. I love the country I'm a part of. I'm so glad to be in America, especially Texas, which is the greatest part of the world. But
it's our neighbor to the south, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be fine on our own, but whatever. But to still appreciate and to value the country where you're a part of, but to know that there's something that trumps that, and it's not Donald. It's your commitment to Christianity. So yeah.
Well, and the same is true, right? It's for even your identity within a church. The kingdom of God isn't contained in the church, but I think being able to see how our identity, or Augustine put it this way, like the church is a whore, but she's my mother. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean you ditch her. But we have to recognize that tension's there. And somehow it's easier to do it with the church if you're like, oh, look at this institutional blah, 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 and all that kind of thing. And then we'll say it about politicians, but we don't think it about the actual structures that our politicians embody on our behalf. And the trick, I think, is that there has been a switch from where the true power lies outside of the nation state to the global economic system. And so now the nation states tend to be more subservient to global economic powers rather than regulating global economic powers. And Bauman and a book like Liquid Modernity and stuff examines things like that. And anyway, that's not what we need to talk about now. But
you know what we are going to talk about? We're going to talk about the next question.
Tell me. I'm interested.
You want to know what it is?
Yes.
I've asked all these questions. I feel like I'm not giving you the chance.
Hold on. Let me find where we are. Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
How has being a minister impacted your theology?
That's a good question. I'm really glad you asked it.
You're welcome. Someone told me to ask it.
Well, thank you, someone. Appreciate it. For your listeners, I'm a minister. It's my day job in Austin, Texas, preacher of a church. And I think as a podcaster, I think I'm driven by an intellectual curiosity to really ask the questions, to learn from people. I find myself when I started the podcast, people have asked me, did you do this because you want to get your voice out there, because you had a message that you wanted to come to articulate? And honestly, it wasn't that. It was because I was really I wanted to have the conversations and ask the questions to people. That's why I started doing what I'm doing. And you're shaking your head because I'm assuming that's consistent with your impulse as well. So I feel like there's an intellectual curiosity as a podcaster, and as a pastor, it's as a preacher, like there's this pastoral impulse that you want to give and to be a resource and to be a sense of encouragement to others. So I feel like there is a sense of like curiosity can take you out in different places. Curiosity can make you join these little niche groups of people who all have X, Y, and Z exactly the same as you. They read the same authors. They listen to the same podcast. They have the same, talking points that they always want to get to. But like as a minister, the table's a lot bigger than just people who read the right people. And by that, the right people, I meant NT. Right. It's people like all across the spectrum. And so as a minister, it creates a far more generous, Brian McLaren reference, orthodoxy that causes you to realize that your preferences are a secondary part of your theology. They're not the centerpiece of your theology. So it's made it more inclusive.
Yeah, and the two things that popped out to me is that being a minister for my theology meant that I learned the difference between thinking for someone and thinking with them. And that as a teacher and preacher, more emphasis was drawn on helping people learn to think and process themselves life experience theologically than helping them get to where I am. This podcast originated in my theology pub group when I was in divinity school, and people wouldn't read the books because they were losers and don't like reading 400-page theology books that their minister picked because clearly that's what you should read before drinking and thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I'll interview them and send them the MP3s, and then you could send me your questions in advance, and then we will just discuss your questions. So I had a bowl, like a glass bowl, that was just called the God Question Bowl. There's like a fish bowl, and I would put the questions people sent, and I had a sign on the wall of like the private room, but it was a glass wall at the brewery, Foothills Brewing Company in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and it said one good God question equals one free pint. And so people would come in and write their question on the card and put it in, and I'd buy them and drink and we'd hang out. But what I found doing that, I was doing it because I wanted them to read the right people. But what became completely different is they would listen to, NT Wright talk or John Cobb or Elizabeth Johnson or someone. And then I actually was just the minister helping up thinking with them, bringing up their life experience and thoughts connected to this person you're engaging, as opposed to me teaching them for 40 minutes and then answering their questions so they agree with it. Yeah. So thinking with them was like the biggest thing. It's how I try to do stuff when I'm in the classroom teaching or as a minister, or if I'm going and visiting a church or speaking or conference. Like my goal and with the podcast is to give people ingredients and make it fun and exciting so you think more. The other thing being a minister meant to me is that there are topics and questions that you have to address when life puts them on the front burner that you as a minister need to step up and talk about before crisis moments. So suffering and the problem of evil and things like that is you don't sit in a hospital when someone knows that their loved one is about to die and they're like, why would God do this? Like, I don't know why God has a plan for this. And then say, well, omnipotence is a metaphysical compliment that was given to God because of our Hellenization. And you don't go explain that that's a bad thing then. But the thing is, when we don't help people engage and think around topics and open up those areas, then little bitty aphorisms of crappy theology just stay in their head. Then they use those to interpret God's presence and participation in their life. And then you end up with stupid stuff that you would never want. And clearly Jesus wouldn't. Like, oh, well, I guess God wanted a new angel in heaven or things like that at tragedies. So
there's a balance.
The time to teach is when you're in the pulpit or when you're in the classroom or in conversations, not in crisis. So theology was impacted, recognizing as a minister the need to not just teach like ideas, but to help people have tools and a theological playlist to interpret their life and God's presence and participation in ways that aren't really bringing crises of faith and stuff when you're at the very moment that the story, the kind of like crescendo point is a homeless dead dude on a cross is not the point you should feel angry and like alone. Like at the very middle of our story is like in the very heart of God is a homeless, abandoned, no friends around, died dead Jew. And if you want to know who God is, we point at that. We're like, this story. So why would we not want to talk about this in advance? Because so many people start attributing God. They have suffering and meaning, and they think, I have to make a meaning out of this horrible experience. Otherwise, it's just meaningless. And so then they insert stupid theology.
Mm-hmm.
Like Calvin.
Which, if you want to hear Trip say 3 nice things about John Calvin, go to the first part of this. Okay, 2 things. I love the origin story for the Homebrewed podcast. That was really nice. I liked hearing that. That's a good story. 2, aphorisms. What is the word you just used there?
Aphorisms.
Aphorisms. I like that. Okay, so I've learned 2 words in this conversation. Thank you. Okay, our next question. This is a good one. Can Tripp please explain process theology in a friendly to actual Bible-believing Christians, and Luke grades/shame him? Did I read that? It seemed like...
Well, look,
Can you explain it?
I saved tweets and then cut and pasted things, so...
Okay, I just thought I was like going dyslexic or something.
Can Tripp please explain process theology in a friendly way to an actual Bible-believing Christian, and Luke grade/shame him?
So I'm the actual Bible-believing Christian. Congratulations, Homebrewed. After almost 1,000 episodes, you finally have an actual Bible-believing Christian on. Yay me!
This has to be a leader. This has to be a podcast listener of yours.
Maybe. Okay, I'm gonna grade or shame you. Let's.
How should I?
You have 60 seconds.
60 seconds?
Yes.
All right.
Hold on, I'll tell you when to start.
60 seconds.
Stopwatch, and 3, 2, 1, go.
Process theology is a Christian theology that insists God is relational all the way up and all the way down, that there's nothing that the universe goes through that God doesn't share, that God is loving and always loving. There's no secret, angry, hell-sending side of God, but God shows up in every moment, loving, embracing, and offering to each moment something beautiful and zesty to come into. And process theology insists that the power of God is best understood through the cross of Jesus. The cross-bearing type of power is divine power, not the cross-building type like Caesar and John Calvin would really like God to have.
38 seconds. That was good.
Oh, see, I thought I was already going to go over.
No, I knew you were good. That's good. So everything's through the cross, that God is loving, God's not power building, God's emptying. I could go for that. That seems very Bible-ish. I mean, I know there's heresy in it because you said it, but I didn't get it on first glance. It's probably like an aftertaste that's going to show up, because I could have said all that stuff in a sermon and believed it. Yeah.
I think some of the parts of like process it would make more evangelicals uncomfortable if they're already cool getting rid of omnipotence, which open theists tend not to like process because they don't know how you have eschatological assurance if God can at some point pull like the emergency switch and be like, well, God was self-limiting for a while, but in order to make sure we have eschatological hope, God has to be able to pull the hand back from around God's back and be like, boom, shakalaka, eschatological banquet. And so they're like, we like process sometimes, but not like here. Others would get uncomfortable because if you think that God is fully relational and invested in each moment and trying to cooperate with the world into bringing beauty and truth in, that means that that just as the Logos was in flesh and embodied in Jesus, there are other histories and trajectories that come to express over time part of the divine, which could be other religious traditions. Whitehead, the philosopher behind process, again, gives explicitly Buddhism as the example that, and like how Jesus makes no sense without the whole history of God's ongoing relationship with Israel and having a mom that seems revolutionary songs like the Magnificat to him and stuff like that. That is a way of seeing the whole story of Israel and the life and ministry of Jesus as this ongoing relational dynamic between God and the world, which the fruit of the vine of David, like the Didache says, is the incarnation. But it's not a divine invasion where like some secret God sperm invades the world and now you have God. But the incarnation is part of God's ongoing history and relationship with the history of Israel. And people are like, oh, okay, I could maybe see that. And then you're like, and since God is that way, God's probably been doing it elsewhere. And they're like, whoa, you're expecting God who is revealed in Jesus to act that way all time to all people made in God's image, regardless of the culture they're in? That's crazy.
What would you say the difference would be in that facet of process theology with, say, Rohr's Cosmic Christ teachings? Are you familiar with Rohr's stuff on Cosmic Christ?
Yeah. They're pretty. I think they're strikingly similar at certain places. Rohr has certain metaphysical commitments as a Catholic that are more tied to kind of Thomism than a process person would, but like those probably only matter to super nerds. I
would try to explain that if this was my podcast, but it's yours, so you don't need to just go with that. You don't have to.
Christ?
No, I was gonna, like, when you say metaphysical commitments to Thomism, like I would feel like, but yours, you
Thomas
don't have to.
Aquinas is.
I know. I'm just saying,
Catholic theologian.
I'm just saying, I would feel like I need to do that now. Okay, next final question on this. Do you think Rohr is slipping this in with the Enneagram teaching to you two right now? Okay, so here's the next question. What's an option you have in, okay, I guess it's what opinion.
It's opinion.
What opinion do you have in the strong minority?
That's such a fun question.
Mm-hmm.
An opinion in the strong minority, that usually you know which ones you have that are there, you just don't say them all the time.
Yeah. I believe in the 4-point line. I believe that billionaire owners should buy their own stadiums. I believe soup is the perfect food. And I believe I just ripped off the intro to Bill Simmons' new show on HBO.
Oh.
I thought that was far funnier than you did.
Yeah. Well, I know that you're in charge of Bill Simmons fan club, so
I seriously, if he asked me to just dissolve my podcast and do it on the Ringer, his podcast network, I probably would do it. That's the only thing that would probably get me to do that. Okay, what opinion do you have in that's in the strong minority?
Well, it probably depends on what room you're in. But
yeah, that's a good point.
Like let's see. If I'm not in Los Angeles, I have some very strong opinions about Laker basketball that are very offensive, mostly having to do with my love and appreciation of the Black Mamba, Kobe Bryant, and his superiority to all other players of his generation, specifically Tim Duncan, his best but not equal challenger.
You really think
I have 3 strong opinions. I haven't thought of the other ones yet.
Okay.
The dumbest idea that Christians ever came up with was divine omnipotence, and we should just go ahead and get over it. And let's see, the third one, that in the next 50 years, the extension of our psychic connection to other human beings via AI and the growth of the interweb will lead to the problematizing of the concept of the self as we understand it, with striking parallels to the responsive culture at the emergence of print.
Wow, that got
we'll have a collective, we'll be bordering on collective mind. When your experience with the world is always through something that mediates the collective wisdom of humanity through the internet, then the level of connection and the level of knowledge that the internet will hold of us, learning from us as we go, will have an extension of our relationship to the external in such a way that we will have internalized more of the human being's collective mind that problematizes the enlightenment notion of the self. I would say it leads us to similar notions of the self at a bigger scale that humans had in previous cultures before the Enlightenment. But that's my strong take. Strong take.
That's a strong one. I think that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard in the last 2 years. I heard Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, say on the comedian Pete Holmes podcast that he saw a alien fly over New Jersey the night before he was drafted or something like that. And this I think is the only thing that's just in that same ballpark. This is there.
Well, I've been reading Kevin Kelly's new book, Inevitable. Founder of Wired magazine.
Megyn Kelly?
No, Kevin Kelly.
Oh, okay.
Kevin Kelly, Inevitable. I'm interviewing him in a couple weeks for the podcast.
Oh, nice.
So, reading that, Marshall McLuhan, and I just started rereading this book by Frederick Ferret called Philosophy of Technology that was written back in the day, and this book called The Pearly Gates of Cyberspace. I've been reading a lot of technology and philosophy stuff because I get to talk to Kevin Kelly, and when I do that, I get unfounded, strong confidence in whatever it is I wake up dreaming about and write on a Post-it. And I said on a Post-it, I was like, in 50 via AI expansion and ubiquitousness of the internet, we'll have unmediated shared consciousness such that the strong sense of the self we have today, post-enlightenment and Descartes and friends, will be blurred.
Okay, after 2 hours of podcasting, I have nothing to respond to that with. And so I'm just going to move on. So I've got a question for you. I want you to compare and contrast Murphy's Law, Scooby-Doo, and multiple sclerosis. Now, Murphy's Law, we blame our mistakes on entropy or personification. So Murphy's Law, Scooby-Doo. No, I'll just let you do it. Murphy's Law, Scooby-Doo, multiple sclerosis. How would you compare and contrast those three things? This is a question that I got, so we got to give the people what they want.
Well, I think we should probably use the questioner's definitions of these in order to avoid my interpretation of Murphy's Law and Scooby-Doo, because I'm a very avid Scooby-Doo fan.
Okay, so his definition, the listener, was other people's evil is explained by supernatural causes. And MS, it's real evil due to sin entering the world. And
how does multiple sclerosis mean that real sin entered the world? Isn't that like a disease?
I think real evil, due to sin entering the world.
So maybe if you had multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, so if you had a disease, that was the byproduct of a broken world. So the ideal garden existence did not include diseases like MS.
All right. Well, if we're dealing with questions like entropy, which is not, or a personification, which I think are both where the problem is something we externalize and then point outside. It's actually strikingly similar to what you're doing with Scooby-Doo if you're wrestling with the question of evil. Namely, the evil is explained by something external. It could be supernatural or it could be natural. But to me, the variable, the thing that is shared by all three, even it's Satan, or it's real evil, or it's sin, is that all three of them are substantial accounts of the problem. When you externalize the problem to something external, be it all three examples are giving here, then what you're failing to realize in the midst of any problem is it is a relational network in which you're participating in. Systems therapists will talk about this as the problem of the identified patient, where you're sitting down with a family counseling, and they're like, well, what's the problem? Little Johnny, he's getting bad grades. And then 2 months later, you find out he's getting bad grades because dad is being overworked at work, but doesn't want to lose his job because his wife is sick and needing to take care of it, which leads to an abusive relationship with him and his mom at home. And then because of that abusive relationship, the son is now having lots of anxiety and freaking out because she sees him as his helpmate. He sees it as his partner, but he doesn't want to acknowledge his dad's abuse of his mom. And then it leads to poor grades. And now you're there for the grades because the real problem is the grades. That's the identified patient.
Trip.
Actually,
I want to hug you right now and say, it's not your fault. Okay, if you got bad grades, it's not your fault.
Grades have not been my problem.
It's not your fault, Trip.
I'm just saying identified patient is where you think the problem is external and then you try to fix it. Whitehead calls it misplaced concreteness. We're like, what's the problem? Let me tell you about it. It's right here. It even happens when people come into your office. They say, look, Reverend, I heard you on this homebrewed Christianity website, and I don't know if you know about Tripp. He's backslidden, and
I know that.
what happens if one of our teens found out you were friends with him on the internet and then listened to this episode from 7 years ago, because I re-listened to them all looking for the perfect example of heresy, and this would lead to the spiritual degradation and integrity of all we hold good and true and dear in Texas and for Christianity.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. Or it's the carpenter, or it's what they do. When we treat the problem as if it's the real problem, it's a myth. The primary site, the identified patient, misplaced concreteness, those are all ways of saying that the problem is some substantive thing. The real issue in dealing with the problems of the world are recognizing our participation in the relational network and learning that we're only in charge of ourselves. We're responsible for ourselves and what we bring, feel, and think, but we're not responsible for what anyone else feels, thinks, and does. We're responsible to them, but we're not responsible for them. And when we get sucked in and we want to externalize externalize the problem rather than own the problem relationally, then you have problems. And all three of those examples are ways of.
But okay, so I'm picking up what you're putting down. How does a debilitating disease like MS have any effect or have any causality with evil or someone else's mistake or someone else's failure? It's a disease that happens, that you don't choose to do it. You didn't drink too little water. You did not take your vitamins. You didn't live under a power line, or I don't think, at least, those things cause that. You have this disease, and personal ownership is great. Understanding the complexity of our existence and how we are tied to the people around us. It's very insightful. It's helpful. But what do you do about like a disease like MS?
Well, one thing I would just say, like when Jesus was asked the question, he was like, "Oh, whose sin caused?" And he said, "No one's," because that's not what God's in the business of doing. The reason people still say stupid stuff like that is because they believe in omnipotence, which is one of my hot takes, is that it's the worst idea Christians ever had. Mm-hmm. Because if God's omnipotent, then God's actually either permitted or chose to do any of these acts. Mm-hmm. That's just bad theology. The question, I think, is that that's not even something God's responsible for. Mm-hmm. God couldn't do anything about that. That's and it's not sin in the world that makes biological creatures that are a part of a 14 billion year evolutionary history. God's not. I mean, yes, God could have decided never to relate to the universe, but I don't think.
But would you say sin? Like there was an ideal, the garden, if you want to call it a mythical garden or whatever, but that's the ideal and that's no more part of the reality for anyone. Would you just like dispel that whole like garden existence as ever being a part of the equation and saying that like
was there a time that human beings were an aberration to everything the universe has ever had and had perfectly functioning genetics? Should you still use genetics and not have like debilitating diseases? Like, so here, let's put it the other way. When we have things like any biological or psychological problem that arises in a person, and we isolate that as something to be removed or fixed, then I think we confuse healing and curing. And if you read stuff like philosophy and theology around disability, they draw a contrast between curing and healing, because healing is about giving a space and restoring relationships for a person in community. Now, if you watch what Jesus does, sometimes he cures someone, but the goal is rarely curing, it's healing. Sometimes he exorcises demons, right? And the goal isn't to get rid of the demons or the goal to have someone get sight back. The goal is the healing of the community. And when we think the problem that it needs cured is something you have because you have a problem, you're dyslexic, multiple sclerosis, or whatever, then we miss that the invitation that Jesus is giving is for healing, which doesn't mean magical fixing of problems, but of opening up relationships where we're responsible to one another for our shared life together. And often the church fails to realize that biological and psychological handicaps, diseases, and things are actual places in which we're called to be present, be community, and be active agents of healing. Instead, we want to cure it and we want to outsource it to some mythical, magical, omnipotent deity who's the opposite of any power Jesus ever did. And the shift or contrast that like theologies of disability, like Amos Young, Thomas Reynolds, have really helped me see is when we have those problems. Like I gave the examples before, they're actually pretty similar. What if the participation in full life that someone who suffers with a psychological disability, which can be silent, right, or a physical disability, or these type of things? What if the call isn't some interventionist curing, but healing of relationships, so families are able to affirm and support each other, so that you're able to participate in the Christian community and things together and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was a long rant.
That was a long rant, and yeah, that's a good long rant. Okay, this is our last question. I got to get home. I got to go home. Okay, let's do this one. Describe the devil's work and exactly how Jesus destroyed it. I feel like on this side of the podcast, I've just been asking you all the questions and making you answer them. So let's just stick with this. This is your podcast. So
what is the devil's work? I'm interested.
I would say, I'm interested in your take on this, following up your response just there. I would say that there. So I'm going to go Christus Victor, Greg Boyd, Richard Beck stuff, that there is a sense that there is an anti-God. There's something, whether you want to talk about Francis Spuford when he described it as the human potential to mess things up. That's not the word he used because he's from across the pond. He says different words. If you want to talk about like our friend Dexter from Showtime show Dexter, he talks about the Dark Passenger. Or if you want to go with what's his name? Stephen Spuford, who wrote a book called The War of Art. He talks about resistance. Like all these things are talking, I think, about the same thing that prevents us from living into this, what Wolf would talk about, the flourishing life. Like there's something that works against that. I would say all of that is pointing to what the devil's work is. And I think I don't need to get into an atonement theory that fully describes it. I think something happened on the cross, that Jesus is victorious over that, and it is breaking in now, and it will continue to break in one day when it happens fully. So I think the devil's work is working against human flourishing, and somehow on the cross, Jesus defeated that in a way that we see a foretaste of victory now, and one day there will be full redemption.
See?
Just as I am with that. Like, this is a response song. I don't know Christian songs. What are you talking about? I thought I was not even your... Yeah. Just play some Cigaros or Explosions in the Sky or whatever you hipster people listen to while you're smoking marijuana and having contemplative moments. But we sing Christian songs here in Texas.
And pop country music.
Yeah, well, I like that Explosions in the Sky is actually just from down the road from me here in Austin, but whatever. I'm going to blame that on you. You post-rock people. Do you like Explosions in the Sky in the band?
I don't know. I only listen to music from the mid-'90s.
All right, well.
I'm just saying, my other hot take is that Counting Crows is in charge of like worship in heaven. That's
that will be a long December. That's the best pun that's happened all day. I just pulled that one out of the air.
Well done. So, I mean, like that Counting Crows conclusions to the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Every podcast conclusion better.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you answered that question because I don't know what.
Give me 30 seconds. Describe the devil's work and how Jesus destroyed it. I want to hear your answer. You have 30 seconds.
I think the devil's work is trying to convince you that you're not responsible for yourself and what you think, feel, and do. And Jesus is breaking free from that bondage is really has to do with learning to listen to the true things in your head rather than the lies, namely like you're God's beloved and you aren't and that's not anything you really need to do other than trust that truth is true about you. Like everything that is destructive and evil in the world has to do with people whose identity is externally validated through trying to like compete with each other for like your possessions and stuff, or getting all like you're trying to get extra hype.
Like when you talk about how many more downloads you got last year than me in the podcast.
I can't even remember how many million downloads I got more than
If you don't remember that moment, you can go watch the video that Maxwell did of the Devilpalooza, which people can download by just simply going to your website, my website, entering their email address. We'll send them a link. We'll send you a link, Trip. You can watch it in beautiful HD, and you'll see that moment along with plenty others, including when NT Wright responds to your statement about how awkward you feel that you're agreeing with him, and NT Wright looks at you and says, "How do you think it makes me feel?" And other great moments just like that on the Devilpalooza video.
Boom shakalaka. Well, thank you, Luke, for coming on Homebrewed. I'm optimistic that this time my interview will be on your podcast because
it's a shame that what happened last time. It really is.
I know. Well, my book's only $3.99 on Kindle right now.
Wasn't it ranked like number 1 in all of quote unquote Christian Christology or something?
Yeah, for like 2.5 weeks. I definitely screenshotted it when I was beating NT Wright. Just that way I can use it next time we're hanging out. Be like, hey, you remember that time? There was about 2 weeks that my Kindle book for $3.99.
So, yeah. So we can do that. We'll make that happen. Did you hear that ringing?
No, I didn't.
Okay, good.
Go to dinner. Or whatever it is you're doing.
My wife's saying it's 4:00 somewhere. It's actually 4:19. I don't want to say it's 4:20. Stop. My phone keeps ringing.
Actually, it goes from 4:19 to 4:21.
Yeah,
at your church.
Trip, this has been fun. I like that we've become friends because of the Devilpalooza, and I feel like this should not be the last time we talk. So,
people should give us topics.
Send them in. We'll answer them. I'm doing a mailbag podcast with my dad soon, and so maybe people send me one for me and my dad, but people most of all need to send them for you and me so we can do this again.
Well, I hang out with my dad without having to record it, so.
Yeah, well, that's the difference. So, Trip, it's been real.
Smoochy boochies, Luke.